Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a Thursday.
Hello.
morning.
Welcome.
It is Thursday, right? I got the right day here?
It is indeed Thursday.
Okay, good.
It's going to be a busy Thursday. Lots to do
flying
today.
by.
So it's the second week of February, which only means one thing around sports. We're 2 weeks away from spring training. No,
I mean, Super Bowl is coming up this weekend.
Super Bowl, man. So do you guys do anything? I know some people like go all out with the wings and parties.
Only when it's my team. And my team isn't anywhere near the Super Bowl. So
very fair.
So not super often then. Well, you guys have been you've had a good Packer fans.
I mean, the season turned out a lot better than I thought it was going to be, right? But my buddy is a diehard football fan. Like every Sunday, all day long, that's what they do. So we'll see if he's throwing anything, but I'm sure I might end up over there for a little bit.
I have to ask, what is the state of Wisconsinites? That's what you guys are considered, Wisconsinites?
Wisconsinites? Don't ask the question. Go ahead, Tommy.
Okay. I don't know. What you're supposed to call you people. So, but what does it say to Wisconsinites if Aaron Rodgers doesn't come back? Like if he's in a Jets jersey?
This is a question we have found ourselves quandering, every off season for the last few off season. Let the guy make his choice. We'll see. I'm not worried about it yet until I have to be.
Okay. Just want to make
until at some point, Tommy, it's gonna happen. He's not gonna be here, whether that's with another team or he retires. He's what, 40 now? 39, 40? The long run of superstar quarterbacks with back-to-back with Favre and Rodgers is gonna end at some point. I hope it's not this next year, but we'll see.
Okay.
It's no angst though.
I'd be okay. I'd be okay starting to train up someone new and in the reins here to, move along now.
Oh yeah, because it's so easy to just
pick up another all-star,
one, right?
Yeah.
Right out of the gate.
Pretty good at it, apparently.
Just bam, right out of it. We've got one in the wings. You haven't seen him yet.
The same conversation was if we were doing this podcast 15 years ago with No, I know you're gonna miss Brett Favre, but we have this guy.
Yeah, right. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. Who's this guy? Who knows? Maybe Love is that guy.
I don't remember who built it, but I remember someone made a PowerBI report, but it was basically like a passing breakdown of where people pass. So they must have used Marker SQL BI's visual and
like the different zones.
Yeah, the different zones. So basically, you just choose a quarterback.
Synoptic panel, I think, is what. It was.
Yeah, and it would basically show like where they passed it, and like obviously, like we know that's available if you just go to like NFL.com. But the fact that someone could build in a Power BI report, getting those distances, I'll have to find it. But
I've seen a very similar report from a basketball. Someone was doing some kind of basketball analysis where they were doing shots from the
around the 3.9 or something.
Here's where were most of the shots made, which ones went in, which ones didn't. So it was kind of another neat visual of like, here's a bunch of dots and where most people shoot from, which I thought was also a very interesting analysis as well. In general, sports are just riddled with data and numbers and statistics nowadays. So like that is just a huge thing.
Didn't they stick a sensor in the World Cup?
Yes, I believe so. I was watching videos about that one.
I haven't seen anything like come out as far as like data from that though. Have you?
They had like, I don't know, I want to say an absurd amount of cameras around the stadium, and they put a sensor in the ball so they could tell when someone was offsides or not, and have it the computer.
And that was what they used it for. Come on.
Exactly. They weren't trying to find funny people in the stand somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah. There's so much more in there.
Honestly, and probably I guess I did too. But like, I mean, some of the best sample data sets, if you're just wanting to experiment, or if you are remotely interested in sports, are sports data sets. Because they're always formatted in a pretty good way for you to be able to sum and do a lot of additional metrics. it gives you the context. But man,
that's when you found your calling, Tommy. That's kind of what, baseball and the stats was like. You were like, I like this. This is the way to go.
Oh man, this would have helped
What
me.
they should do,
what?
you know what they should do is like, and it wouldn't even have to be sensors, but the track the speed of players on the fields and stuff, because I think
You're back to the sensors again.
Well, whether it's the sensor,
They already have
like
that.
you can do it with video now.
They say
exactly
like,
right.
Like give me the miles per hour somebody's running to just put it in perspective
kilometers per
like
hour.
whether it's on the pitch or on the football field or whatever, how fast these people are running, to give perspective, just like how slow the average Joe is compared to these professional athletes.
They have advanced analytics now in soccer where they basically say relative effort, so they know how fast someone can run, and they basically do like how often were they running at like 70% of that speed, how often were they running at 90% of their speed, and that basically says like how much effort they put in. So what they
do track speed.
That makes total sense, because you could definitely see, you could gauge, someone's average level of effort each game, and then you can tell when they're going to be gassed at some point, because at some point you're going to be tapped and you're going to be out of speed, and your effort will be lower.
The Yankees actually, and this will be the last baseball thing. We're almost there. I can't wait. But the Yankees actually hired a British data scientist, and what they did is they tracked the heart rate, and everyone has sensors for practice and games. And they basically created like an index, like a Sims index of like their energy. So if they dive for a ball, how much they're swinging, what their heart rate is. And so that's when they give the players off, when it goes below like 85 or whatever their number is. So, which is one of the reasons they said Aaron Judge performed the way he did, because he would get the time off, like on random days.
You say these names of people like I know who they are. I'll just nod my head and say yes. Yes, Tommy. I get the concept. I don't know who the people are.
I reached out to you on Aaron Rodgers. I would hope for some of the reciprocation here. But
my point in all this is we should create, like, what do you think the appetite would be for like the armchair quarterback report, right? Like if you want to throw down and talk crap about your teams, right? Like, what would the average Joe have been able to do? Yeah, you would have been out by the second quarter, right? Like you wouldn't even made it to the third and fourth quarter. Like where do you compare?
First quarter, 5 minutes, I'd probably be dead. I would be run, I'm done.
Right? It's like, how could you not make that play? It's like, well, the guy's been playing for 40 minutes and at this elite level. Like, sorry, he didn't get the other 2 inches to tip the ball.
Right.
I do feel like this level of information, and even having like that, Tommy, to your point, like the health bar, someone with cameras should be able to identify that. That feels like a secret weapon inside the fantasy football leagues, being able to see your players and switch them out, or there has to be something there where they can monetize that portion of it. Some company should. I mean, if we can drive cars with cameras, we've got to be able to figure out people's level of effort with cameras. Seems reasonable.
We should do this for ourselves with heart rate and sleep, and basically get a notification when you're like, you need to sleep. You're not going to be productive anymore.
I think I would be getting that all day long. I probably I'd just snooze it and just turn that off. Darn, notification keeps coming up.
Data-driven insights, man.
As we drive into these topics of conversation where I'm exploring things I don't know, it's almost as if I'm falling into a mind trap of the anchoring effect.
Oh man.
Ooh.
Good lead in. So before we get going to our main topic of today, which will be mind traps, Michael found a couple really interesting YouTube videos that are out on the internet just around mind traps in general. So we'll share those just in a minute. But before we get there, we want to do a couple quick announcements. We have been working with the SQL Bits team trying to promote their event. SQL Bits is a great conference that comes once a year. They're doing it at the ICC Wales this year in the UK. It'll be March 14th through 18th, and you can go visit SQLBits.com. If you want 5% off your ticket, you can use PowerBI.tips 5 to get 5% off your ticket. And hopefully you enjoy the conference. I heard it's going to be really good. Tommy will be there. Tommy will be able to represent the gang.
Passport in. Yeah.
Make sure you find him and tell him your favorite restaurant or favorite place to eat while you're in ICC Wales, because Tommy's always about, tell me, if you had to die tomorrow, you only had one place to eat in your area, what would you go to? So I think I've heard this question a number of times. It's awesome. Tommy's all about his food. The other event we have coming up is the Power BI Global Summit. So globalpowerbisummit.com. It'll be on March 6th through the 10th. It is a virtual conference. You'll be able to watch it anywhere in the world. Go sign up at globalpowerbisummit.com, and you can join us there. We will all be speaking. I think we all have various talks at that conference, and we will be attending that one as well. All right, with that, let's jump into the main topic today. All right, so I'll openly admit the topic came from me. I'm an avid YouTube listener, well, YouTube watcher, listener. I do all the things on the YouTube, and sometimes the YouTube algorithm recommends to me really interesting things. So with that, there was 2 videos that kind of came up, and it's a book. Correct me if I'm right here, Tommy. There's what's the name of the book that was referenced in these YouTube videos? I forget the very beginning.
Something human behavior or human thinking.
I'll have to go pull the name of it. I meant to write that down, and I forgot to write it down beforehand. But this is
Thinking Fast and Slow.
Fast and Slow. Yeah.
Thinking Fast and Slow. That's the title of the book, and I can't remember the author's name at this moment, but I'll go get that later. The concept of this book is there's 21 just kind of inherent mind traps that you can't. I think the main concept here is your brain can't handle every little detail all the time. So a lot of times your brain starts forming shortcuts to get to certain answers. Like it uses data around it to form an opinion, and sometimes without your without your knowledge. And as I was watching the video, and again, my mind kind of maybe went there more so than most people, but I was like, man, these are things to be aware of when we build reports. And so I think the topic for today will be maybe picking out a couple of these key mind traps that we watched or listened to, and just kind of picking out a couple areas where you say that mind trap would relate to reporting, or that mind trap would potentially push you to think one way or another about some data.
So the author is Daniel Kahneman, who is a mega bestseller, world-famous psychologist, winner of Nobel Prize in Economics, takes us on a groundbreaking tour of the mind and explains 2 systems that drive the way we think, which is in these mind traps.
And this is just there's 2 little YouTube videos that kind of just summarize some of the topics.
Mm-hmm.
While I am an avid reader, a YouTube watcher, I am not an avid reader. So it's great that I always wait till the movie comes out, usually better. So that's just how I roll. So Seth's rolling over right now because he loves reading. He's like, you small person.
That's so not true.
You would be correct, Seth.
But actually, it's not necessarily a mind trap, but over the years learned that many people learn in different ways, right? And fiction especially is very difficult for some people to read just because they don't have a mental picture of like what's going on in reading a book. Yeah. And that's why there's probably a mass audience that loves the consumption of movies over books.
So this will also be interesting.
They're all different, Mike.
Do you like to watch the podcast, or do you like to listen to the podcast? Because that would, right? It's not quite comparable. Maybe here's what we should do. We should send our podcast video to ChatGPT. It should then extract out the words, and then people could read it like a book. There we go. Each episode could be a chapter.
Our listens will go down and just summarize this video.
That's for the audience who likes to read it.
Yeah,
it was pointed out to me. It was pointed out to me. They have
England. Thank you.
Teams Premium now. Do you get they're integrating? So
Wait,
big release
Premium?
news. Big release news. What, a couple days ago, where Microsoft's using ChatGPT in Bing and Edge now, or implementing it, where there's going to be the search is going to be different. They're going to show you a different experience of what the AI driven search algorithms are doing. But with Teams Premium, they're now offering up a summarization of meetings and action items, and they're interpreting what's going on in the meeting to make it much more efficient. And one of my coworkers brought this up to me yesterday, and I was just because he hates taking notes, and we talk about taking notes all the time, right?
All the time. I'm always taking notes.
Blah blah blah. And at the end of it, I always have to summarize my notes because it's not, it's a stream of consciousness. I basically break it out into 2 different areas. One is what are the key points that they're saying, and then as they're somebody is talking, I'm writing questions while I'm listening, and then at the end I have to like summarize that the conversation itself, because that stream of consciousness isn't great notes.
Yeah.
But if this thing can do that for me, like for $7 extra a month, I don't know, like we'll see.
So I haven't even seen this advertisement come
So
across.
it's very similar to, and there's parts of it too that are like similar to, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Gong, where everybody in the meeting that speaks, it has a name, and then it highlights in the video where they're talking, right? So not only does it record it, right now you obviously have a dump of, in Teams, even the text, speech to text, so the whole dialogue is going on, but it hones in and starts to pick apart, like, here's when people are talking if you want to go watch it, and then actually the summarization of the meeting and call outs and actions, I guess, are where the productivity aspect of this becomes really interesting.
This is really cool. Okay, definitely sign up for that right away. Take my monies.
Well, but
right.
I mean, it's gonna have some quality, but I think that part of that though too goes in the chat GPT thing in itself, which I do love.
We'll get there. I think there's topics today that'll help us get to that topic.
But like, let's take the meeting summarization, and obviously we'll do the long walk back to Power BI here. But like, if you were just to take the notes from a summarization from an hour, there's a tendency to go, well, I don't need to take notes. So whatever chat GPT comes out with, okay, well, that's everything. And that's what's gonna stick in your mind as the highlights or the notes. If you don't take it, it's the same idea of you do a better ability of remembering when you write down compared to typing. And if I'm just relying on these bullet points, like, great, that's what this is about. I don't have to do any additional effort. I don't know the idea here around the 21 mind traps is our brains can't process everything, and we have filters or mechanisms that we may not be aware of in order to either remember information or relate things or process things correctly. So, and I think a huge part of this too is whether it's notes from ChatGPT or, and Mike, you said initially for the Power BI developer, I took a lot of the video from what the reports look like and whether or not we're making it easier or harder for consumers.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think all these topics kind of like circle together, mind traps, shortcuts that you're trying to do. You can only process so much information, even in these meetings with video now. Like, there's a whole bunch more stimuli, I think, that's happening all the time. And so you're now trying to figure out, okay, how do I distill down the main portion of what I'm trying to convey into an easy to use, easy to digest way? And I think just being aware of, potentially like how GPT is going to change how you think and what you do. I think the discernment level of what information you're being given to inside Power BI or anything reporting you read on the internet is going to have to be much higher now. I think it's going to be much harder to detect when someone's saying real stuff versus not.
So let's dive in, because I'll take it from the developer's point of view first. And what really stuck out to me is there's a few of them from the mind traps of
Let's go through. So what I would say here, there's 21 of these mind traps. I'm going to say, be very clearly, we're probably not going to hit all of them. I think I'm going to cherry pick the ones that I felt like
there are some that just may not be relevant completely, or we can't draw the correlation.
Yes. So anyways, go ahead, Tommy. Sorry, I just want to make sure that we're going to be clear on the expectations here.
I'll give a few of mine that I think stuck out as the most relatable, and then if you guys either add or
let's just I say we just pick one, like one that's relevant. Let's talk about it, and then jump around to others that we think are relevant.
I think my favorite was the paradox of choice. And because how much, so the paradox of choice is one where more choices are always seen initially as a net positive, but ultimately lead to less decisions. And the study that they gave was they had consumers that had either a choice from 6 cans of jams or another audience who had a choice of 36 cans of jams. More people flocked to the one that had 36 different types of jams, but more people, like 40% of the total, actually bought when there were only 6 choices. So we always go into like, oh, more choices, great. But when it comes to actually making a decision or processing it, we're ultimately going to have more either what is it called, the regret bias. We're going to feel like lost opportunity, and ultimately will lead to less decisions. So to me, there's like, oh, my reports, and
This is
thinking it, yeah,
yeah, exactly right.
and I think
this is where my mind went. I'm like, this is one of the ones that I picked up on. I was like, yeah, for sure. This is so. What happens when you have that report user asking you for stuff like, oh yeah, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want like, I want to have it, deliver me
yep,
tacos, I want it to, do my homework, I want it to give me a kitchen sink, like all these features of the report. You ask for all these things because it's like at the time it's the conscious part of your mind. You're thinking, oh, if I added more things, it just becomes more useful. In reality, you have a limit. You can't consume all of that information. I think it's a great point.
yeah, and that goes back to the mental, or even our conversation on mental models too with processing. But if we have a report with has 7 different data points,
Mhm.
like 7 different KPIs on the page, right? That we're trying to, in a sense, tell a story by. We're like, great, we have everything all in one place. I don't have to click. And we think less clicks, the better. But from a user point of view, they may go, all my data is here. But from making a decision and actually trying to process that, that's going to lead to probably a negative bias, whether they feel it or not. And this goes back to simplicity. This
Mhm.
goes back to intention and the actual audience. So I think to me, this was one of the ones that stuck out the most.
I agree with that. I think I'm going to break it down a little bit different, or break it down in different areas that struck me. Like one is in the initial conversations with end users. I think this is also one of the biggest challenges that they
Mm,
face in trying to define what it is they want, right? Because we're always after the insight. I don't want to deliver you a report that I don't want to deliver you data that you're going to export and then go build another report on, because
Yes.
that's stupid and it's a waste of time, virtuous waste, right? But that's easier for some people than to like consolidate all of these things that they are doing with that data or whatever uh, into a narrowed focus that allows them to articulate what that is actually going to be valuable. And I think this actually kind of falls into that conversation, because potentially there's too many things that they haven't put together into a singular piece that says this is going to be my most useful report. I can make decisions off of this thing. The other part of that is kind of on our end. There are hundreds of options and features in Power BI that we can offer up to end users. And how often do we confuse the issue because we're saying, oh, hey, okay, well, here's the data. Here's 20 different visuals we can pick from. Of these 20, we're going to narrow it
Yes.
down to 10. And these 10, we get to decide, because I think there's relevance in a couple one of your data sets. It's going to be the same thing. Your interest is going to be high, but the
Yes.
action or engagement is not. And that's what kind of was outlined in this part of the video, where it's like a lot more people went to the higher choice selection, but the actions were smaller. Whereas, maybe the 6 cans of something didn't elicit as much interest, but the action was a lot higher,
Mhm.
right? So if you bring it down to something that's digestible and say, okay, here's 3 visuals, even though in the back of your head you're like, I know there's 10. Here's 3. Let's pick the best one. You're probably going to get to a better
mhm.
outcome and action from somebody to be able to pick something, versus offering up too much and kind of falling into this trap, which we're saying, like,
It
technically this is
happens.
how all of us think.
Yes.
So so
I
those are the
also
two go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead. Those
No,
are the
these are
two
the
that
2 that, like, in the front, and then the other one I think you addressed a little bit, but, like, too many features in a report where an end
hey.
user doesn't know how to interact with it, or
Yep.
it's just like, what is going on? Like, there's too much on a report page
That's exactly
that
where I was gonna go. Yep.
it's almost too distracting,
Yes.
instead of having a clear message, providing the insight, and maybe breaking it off into a couple pages, right? I think where this gets interesting to me is in UI UX. People are always like, oh, like, reduce the clicks. And it's like, no, sometimes increasing the clicks and presenting another page is actually a better experience,
Yes.
because it reduces the noise. And and the number of choices somebody has to make. Like if you think about
Agreed.
some of the most complex analytical pages, right? There's just tons of data. It's not like they're not useful, but in order to bring somebody up to speed to use that takes a very long time. And then they become used to it, right? You work past that kind of paradox of choice because you're like pushing yourself because you have to, versus the way we can present a report page to an audience is here's some simplified information. And if you want to dive into it deeper, you go into the next one.
I think that's 100% on point. And I can't tell you the number of reports that I've looked at where there's just, it's the difference between like an analyst and a report consumer or a VP or an executive looking at the same information, right? Some audiences are more than willing to have lots of visuals on a page and can handle more things on the page. Other individuals just can't, and they need just a simpler story around what's going on with the data. And to your point, one of the main features I like to use from a performance standpoint, as well as trying to really cater people's experiences at the over, like I typically formulate this overview and then detail pages, right? It seems to be a very common pattern I look at. Okay, what are the main 3 or 4 KPIs or key indicators or key metrics that we want to look at? Like if these things are off, I need to know more information. And we kind of have that conversation first. And then from there, we can then drill people into, okay, here's a page that addresses why sales were down. And let's go a little bit more deeper because we can't assume one single page will answer all of our questions. We're not building like a massive storyboard here of all your data. It just won't be performant even from a Power BI side, right? We'd rather have you pick the region, the salesperson, the whatever that is what we would consider is underperforming, and then drill you into a more narrowed topic around understanding why it's occurring.
Seth, I love you because you made me think of something that I didn't with this particular mind trap is when we're doing the scoping calls, how important is it for us to provide simple, concise choices to the user when we're trying to understand what they want? A lot of times we go on carte blanche where we go, what do you want? Do you want it this or this and this and this? Or
because we can do anything.
we can, and that's the other side of that is I'm literally going through this right now with a new model, and I'm like, well, I could, and I have too many choices in my head, so right now there's nothing. But the idea also more specifically for the consumer or the stakeholder when we're helping them out, we should be leaning. I don't know if you ever watched 60 Minutes, but one of my favorite parts of 60 Minutes is the person interviewing will always say like, so, and that's what happened, and then the person that they're interviewing will always like repeat exactly what they said. And part what we should be doing in our scoping is providing such concise decisions for them, not what do you want or how do you want the KPI displayed, is helping them provide those 2 to 3 choices that they can choose from.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can say like, you want to see the member percentage over like by team. Yes. Okay. Kind of thing. And making it very concise rather than expecting the user to give you exactly the roadmap. So it's helping the stakeholder out too, even before the report's created.
I think
Cool.
we've kind of exhausted this topic. I'd like to kind of move on to some other ones so that we can get through a couple more here as well.
What other mindsets are there? And to be clear for everybody here, like our apparently like our brain, all of us, our brains do these things. I think
Similar things.
Some more so, right?
Yes.
Like I think I can look at some of these mind traps and be like, oh yeah, I deal with that one hardcore. Like, oh wow, that one's really interesting. And this one, like others, it's like, okay, I get that, but I don't see a lot of patterns of that going on in my head. But it is interesting that these are apparently for all of us, for everyone, right? So what's one that stuck out to you, Mike?
So another one that stuck out to me, and again, I'm not always. There is probably some correlation to this, but I also want to point out the fact that sometimes there is a bit of randomness in your data. So I'm going to point out gambler's fallacy. And the gambler's fallacy is like you're at a gambling table and you're throwing dice, and the dice has an equal chance to roll whatever number it is every single time. There is no historical value present. The dice do not know what it was rolled previously, or you go to the roulette table and you're rolling red or black. There is no pattern. It will just randomly occur. Now, people will also say, well, it went black 5 times. It's got to go red at some point, right? Those are the kind of things people tell themselves, right? There has to be some. What we try to do is we're trying to put order around things or balance around things, and we take some of this knowledge around. Okay, we understand that a roll of a die is 1 in 5, 1 in 6. Let's do 6-sided dice, not 5-sided dice. So you do, that is the odds. But when we start seeing a lot of one number come up, we start assuming that the odds of the other numbers increase. It never increases. So where I see this potentially occurring inside reporting, now granted, we do have procedures and policies in place in companies, right? If you look at your financial information year over year or multiple years at a time, usually you're growing, usually you're investing into the company, you're adding things into it. Not to say that every year is random, but I do think the smaller window of time you look at, the more variability you're going to see in the data. So this is why in a lot of reporting, you'll do like a rolling 12 months, sum all the sales for rolling 12 months, and let's just look at the bigger picture. We aggregate more to the higher numbers because in that gambler's fallacy, if you're looking at only a very short window of time, the data could be kind of all over the place. If you look at a much longer period of time, you're getting that like averaging effect. You get the law of large numbers. We're now starting to reach an average or medium that it seems to be more consistent. So I think sometimes I feel, and again, this may be a loose analogy here, but I do think there's at some point people put too much emphasis on, oh my gosh, we were down by 1% this month versus last month. Well, are we looking at the micro picture or are we looking at the big picture? Because that may have just been a blip on the radar versus something we actually need to like throw our hands up and we're actually needing to take directional action and change on things. So I think it's just mindful of just knowing that that occurs in your data, and we are prone to thinking that everything will reach a happy medium all the time. In reality, it's a bit more messy than that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't have anything to add.
That goes in a little with like the confirmation bias too. But to your point, I love particularly doing rolling averages for reports, or at least starting off with them if there's not a lot of targets or those KPIs aren't defined.
Yes.
Because that's such a good, for me, it's such a good index because, again, you see total sales over 12 months. It can vary, kind of, okay, it is what it is, but trying to help someone understand the most recent time, like how much really does looking at 12 months, like if you were to look at just a total number of 12 months, really help a user out without some context, truly, because you can't do anything that occurred 9 months ago.
You can't replace the data,
right?
And it's a lot of this idea of, I think from my perspective, it's like making sure that we're still staying on track or rough. Again,
right.
it's the there was another TV series that I was watching that I thought was really good. It's about futures and predictions. I don't know. It was on I think maybe it was Paramount Plus. I can't remember where it was. I'm gonna have to Google it now because I can't remember it. Sci-fi based movie based on a book.
Right.
Of course, I wouldn't know the book name either. This is a great portion of the podcast here. I love this part.
You don't seem to know. I don't
seem to know anything this morning.
The fact that you botched it.
I botched it really badly. However, I'm thinking of the story. Like the idea here is like you can never predict one person's actions, but you could predict the sum of a lot of people's actions. Like the mass of people is much more predictive than it is just one individual person. I want to say it was like Isaac Asimov's book. I'll Google it. You guys talk about something else here for a moment.
I'm going to bring up a different mind trap, and this one to me falls into effective communication, right? So this one is the halo effect, right? And how it was described in the video, and the kind of lead up for this one is the order of how we present traits or describe traits to people, and an example of like matters. In an example, it's like relationships, right? Like the halo effect being, two people are definitely on their best behavior when they first meet, when they first are getting into a relationship, and everything outside that window of where both of you are on your best behaviors, if things start to change, it's really easy to justify the bad behaviors because you've created this halo effect of, oh, this person is perfect, right? That's how we all get married, I guess. Where it's more relevant, though, is when you're describing things. So an example that struck me was if I say, we have two people. The first person is intelligent, charming, engaging, pessimistic, and
Oh yeah.
argumentative.
Yep.
Right? Like we create a mental picture of that person. Now, if I describe the second person and I say this person is argumentative, pessimistic, engaging, charming, and intelligent, your first reaction is, well, the second person is like, wow,
Jerk
like
face.
they're a little bit different than the first one, but you'll recognize about halfway through I'm describing the same traits. They're just in different orders. And what struck me about this is on a couple levels. One is always start with the good and end with the bad, right? So it's almost like if I have a sequence of how I'm presenting, a report issue or an issue in general.
Ooh, this is going deep now.
What are the positives about like what is happening, right?
Yes.
Like what is the high level? What are the positives and the outcomes of like the decisions that we're doing, and how is that helping the business, or how is this going to clarify or help the report? And then go into like the challenges of this or that we're facing are blah blah blah. But to me, if this cognitive bias, or it's not cognitive bias, if this halo effect or mind trap happens to all of us, then it certainly makes sense that I want to lead with the good and follow with the bad. Whereas I can certainly say my propensity is, okay, here's the bad. I'm going to solve this, and this is how I'm going to solve this. And the outcome is, but by the time I get to the outcome, it doesn't matter because people are like, oh, this sucks. Like, or where it ended up in the report realm is if I lead with deficiencies in the data that we're going to fix, I'm leading with the wrong thing. All people are going to hear is all of this is wrong.
This is wrong.
Like this is
not
just
working.
bad. I can't trust any of this.
Yeah.
Versus leading with the good. Like we have captured 98% of all of the data in our organization for this report. It's geared in. Here's the insights. Here's what this is going to allow you to do. Like drive the positives and then finish with and we're still working on the 2% of negative things that like there's some like discrepancies that we're fixing in the data. And this one was just like an aha for me going, dang, like that's powerful, So one that stuck out to me.
I think we should use every tool in our arsenal to make sure everyone loves our reports all the more. So I think this is a great tool.
I mean, but this is our job. Like we're stuck between IT and business. And if you think about like how important it is that business understands what we're trying to say.
Yes.
Like this is one of those things. You always want to paint things in you're not lying, but you want to paint it in a better light that they're gonna come out of the conversation in a positive manner, as opposed to nothing works. Because when you start hitting those broad strokes of people, that can have big impacts on an organization with sales, marketing, etc.
So I highlighted this one. I did take it a slightly different way, where I went back to the experience of a particular report, where what we highlight first is going to matter. And if we're just highlighting like total volume, it's kind of like a null or a neutral thing, whereas really focusing on trying to get some index, some comparison right off the bat and really highlighting that, to me, that's the first thing that someone would see. And also what would really stick out what the report's about. And because going back to if you're looking at 24 months or 12 months volume, right? If that's the first thing someone's seeing in a report, to me, that to correlate this, that's kind of like what they think the report's about or what's going to really process, compared to if you almost really focus on that arrow up or arrow down type of idea in some way or fashion, showing that comparison is something that matters. I think is paramount. But no, I love this one too.
But I also think you use this to your advantage to some degree. So if I'm thinking about like a KPI card or an executive dashboard, right? You're also looking at, I mean, again, you can't control every single data point on the page. You're not trying to put like the good stuff on the left-hand side and the bad stuff on the right. But as you're looking at this, I mean, this to some effect is actually what you want to be doing, because if you're glancing at a report and you see a lot of green arrows up, great. I feel like I've got that initial look of, hey, we're doing all right. But if I look at that same report and I see a lot of red arrows and a lot of, caution arrows, whatever but you're indicating bad things to me on that page, that is an area where I want to dig in and find more information. So like I see your side of things, Seth, when you're talking about like it's more like the presentation of like the work that the team is doing, because that's definitely a factor here. And I think I tend to be the opposite of what you talk about, Seth. I think we've worked together a number of years, so like we know like kind of how each other works. You definitely come into the area of like you're picking at the perfection of what you need to get done in the report. It's definitely a we're missing this 2% of data, like you kind of in your analogy. We're going to fix that. My tendency is usually the opposite effect. Usually I'm coming and going, everything's great. Look how wonderful we are. We've cleaned like 98% of the world. Like, look how fast this is. Like, I'm touting all the great things that we do. And I think it's also, I think it's good to do both, but have balance into those for those two items. Tommy, what you were saying around like that initial landing page of red and green, I think leads me into another effect that I think is relevant to the same conversation, is talking around the anchoring effect. And I was thinking about this one, and this one I find I think I passively observed this occurring more often than not. Usually I go to a page somewhere, or if we're building a dashboard, there's always like, I need the number. What's the total number? So are we, and maybe this is a question more so than a statement here, are we inherently introducing the anchoring effect? So let's explain the anchoring effect is, if I was going to sell you a car, I would put the price higher or show you a car that has a higher price because I know you won't buy that, but you will buy something that it's a bit more reasonably priced. I've also heard this used in retail as well. In a retail store, they will put the most expensive things out front. They may, like if you're buying speakers, right? There is one speaker or speaker set that is like ridiculously off the charts expensive. Like it's 10 grand. So someone will always come into your store and be like, give me the most expensive speaker you got. And if you don't show them the $10,000 speaker, they're going to be like, that's too expensive. Show me the next most expensive speaker. And then you can sell. But if you don't have that higher anchor point in price, you can't get them to a final price to, I don't want the best, but I want a little bit lower than the best.
Well, I think a powerful example too was if I were to say, how tall is the tallest redwood tree?
That's good too.
Is it higher or lower than 1,200 feet? Well, by introducing that number, you're probably going to give a number relatively near, compared to if I said, is the tallest redwood 600 feet? Which those two would make a huge difference.
So what's the difference between this and the contrast effect? Because I thought the contrast was where you put a small number up against a large one, and it means less, right? They're very similar in the style that it's like, if you the funny one was,
I think they're two different.
I don't know where it could be. I could be conflating them, but like the funny one was where the wife is asking her husband for a car, and it's $50,000. So she makes the mistake of presenting two other cars at $50,000, and what she should have done was present two at $150,000.
Yes.
So that when she wants the car at 50, it looks like it's less.
A deal. Exactly. But I think knowing that exists, I mean to me that's anchoring that whole point there. So that's what, and so where I'm maybe teasing out the idea here a bit more is I'm thinking about when I build reports and there's that big, large dollar amount number at the upper right-hand corner, because that's our total spend, whatever that may be. And then I'm looking at everything else on the report page and all those other numbers are much smaller. Is that in fact implicating something that I'm doing on that page where, if I'm talking aggregated numbers, I should be showing a lot more aggregated numbers on that page. So that way the numbers are not trying to anchor me to a very large number. I may be accidentally pushing that user to think, we're at 300 million in revenue, and I see all these numbers down here at $1 million or less. What is going on? Like you're already saying these numbers are too low. They should be higher. How are we going to get to that big number with all these little numbers laying around? So there may be something to it, just to being able to be more intentional about what you're presenting on those main pages, particularly when you're rolling a lot of things up to a high value.
Yeah, this one I thought of it in a different way, because the anchors are the things that we do know, right? Like,
true.
You're presenting me with a new idea that I need to explore, and I'm viewing that new challenge based on known anchors in my knowledge center.
Yes.
And this one struck me along the lines of people being presented with a new visual, right, that they're not familiar with and they don't know how to read, right? Because like that's something I think we've talked about previously, where you may pick this amazing, multi-chart, multi-axis, different visual that is the only way to describe that data, and somebody's never seen that before, right? So that anchoring effect is certainly in play there, where they're like, I'm going to latch on to the visuals that I have known before, which is where you would get into trouble potentially, and where I think we've discussed, like you need to add more indicators on a page, more information, like describing how you read that visual.
Yes.
If it's not one of the core visuals that you're throwing out, all like putting in reports all the time, because people are gonna potentially come to the wrong conclusions because they have different anchors, and those are probably based around visualizations that they've seen before, and especially when it's more unique, the harder that challenge is going to be for them to digest what you're trying to tell them.
Well, I think, Mike, to your point too, if you have a ratio to, or like average price, and that's displayed first, well, my goodness, this is why context matters so much. Because if you have a random number at the top that says 74%, well, to the user, everything's going to be compared wherever that number is shown to the 74%. Right.
That may be
right.
what you may want that in your
You
report.
may want that, right?
Yeah, or you may not.
Right.
So I think it's just being like, that's where I'm kind of teasing this idea out here, is like being a bit more intentional about that.
So but let's say the 74% is just your overall 12 months, but the user may not understand that. So everything's going to be compared. That 74 may be bad. Where this goes back to me, like, and I keep going back to this, like, not just today, but I think maybe since we started the podcast, the importance of having the context in a report. If you're going to display a random number or a ratio, you better have something that compares to what is considered good, because a user may go into a report, especially if they don't have the KPI, or if they have that number on their team, of, well, what on comparison to what. So we need to help them more and more, especially with those volume numbers, and especially when we're started that summary page, that is that number good? And if that's the only number I see, then I'm going to consider that the base.
Yeah.
So how important it is for us, whatever we provide, to really also provide what we want the anchor to be.
Agreed. And I think this is a bit more of what you're saying, controlling the narrative a little bit more,
Controlling the anchor,
making sure you know what is your anchor point, and making sure that it is
right,
a good anchor point to be attached to.
If you have the $3 million at the top, well, is that, and do you want that compared to, or is it, that's just what the number is, or should it really be around, like, 3,200, because that's what the true anchor is that you want?
Or you start doing things where you normalize your data, right?
Right.
So this is the idea of, like, there may be numbers you're talking about that are very high and very low, and they're very different in nature. So that technique, you just normalize the information, so that way it could be compared relatively to each other. So you actually have a relative scale of what's going on.
Right.
I think that's really good as well.
So I'll provide another one, and this one goes back a bit to the context, but it's the recency bias, where what you see or what has happened in the past, you can basically go, I knew that, or that makes sense. And there's no other culprit for this than with line charts, right? So, and I thought about this over and over again, where whenever you see a line chart, you're like, okay, that makes sense, kind of thing. You're like, oh yeah, we had a high January and now it's normal. And the line chart by itself is helpful, but it cannot make a decision. No one can make a decision off a single line chart by itself. And this goes back to providing that context when I'm seeing this on designs, where you have a minimum, or you have like the high and low to help with the, like, we're going back to the other mind trap. But anytime we're looking at historical data, well, that just we're going to process, go, okay, makes sense that that's what it is. It is what it is.
This also feels like, this is the recency that you're talking to, or it also feels a lot like what you're doing when you buy a new car, or you buy a car that's new to you, and you're driving that car around. You're like, wow, I didn't know how many other cars were on the road that are just like mine. Like, just because it's in your mind, you actually observe other cars that are similar, and that might be also another effect too, where you're unless you bring attention to something, you don't really realize how common it occurs.
That's
Oh,
the
hindsight. I'm
Beider-Mein.
thinking hindsight. I'm sorry. I was
Yeah, Beider-Meinhof is where you buy it and all
Mm.
of a sudden you see it everywhere.
Oh yeah.
Hindsight bias, right?
The
Is
hindsight. That's what I was referring
I think that's
to.
a really good point in the line charts, right?
Yeah.
And this one I took a little bit differently, but at the same time, it's a perfect example. Is
Oh yes.
Not only is it hard for us to understand what our thought process was in the past because it's distorted through our current lens, but at the same time, what's interesting is, and you see this in business, right? People saying like, oh, they're judging the outcome of something that happened in the past as opposed to who is the person that made the judgment call at the time, right? Sound judgments at a moment in time get distorted with like, oh, I knew that was going to happen, and you guys messed it all up because obviously we can see that in hindsight, and it distorts the fact that there were it shows a perfect example of this, like how World War II started, right? At the time, it's like this yarn net, like rat's nests of all of these complicated things. And then the way we view it is this very linear, line of here's all the events that precipitated why that happened. It's like, well, of course, through our lens, it's easy to understand why it happened, or I should say, through the retrospective hindsight view, it's easy to put things in a very strategic order.
Yes.
While it's happening,
it makes sense. Oh, this occurred and that occurred. Yeah,
correct.
Right. Why these events actually happened,
kind of stuff.
Yep. Yeah, totally.
I mean, we do such a disservice to our consumers when we just display data. Then, based on what we're saying, when we're just showing the numbers over 12 months without any context of high or low compared to what anchor. I mean, honestly, it's not that it's worse than nothing at all, but I think we really have to be conscious of just displaying data in a report and a summary and a general report. I want
to add to that. I think yes, and it's the expectation. It's like, you're right. Like, don't just show the number, but show like what is the goal of the number? Like, what are we marching towards? That is really where I think real action comes from. Because if you just show, like, to your point, if we just show the line chart, okay, whatever, like fine, but I have no reference point to figure out where we're trying to go. Is this good or bad? We're up, $1 million in sales this year. I don't know. Was that good? Last year, at this time, we were up 3 million. Like we could be way off our track. Like, so having those expectations at least set, reference points to know if we're performing better or worse than what we were doing last time or whatever, I think is a huge advantage. And I think that helps a lot with these biases that you're looking at as well.
Yeah. I've been doing more and more just staying away from like total volume as a prominent number and trying to create some average or some index, just a comparison when there is none. And if someone goes, well, and they may see that first, I think like you said this a while ago where you were doing the cumulative project, and that first they didn't know what to think of it because you introduced a new metric.
Yeah,
but now they rely on it. Right.
Yeah. They're like, what is this? Why would you do a cumulative sales amount? Like, well, then now I can look at cumulative sales from this year to last year and I can compare. And so there's like a couple additional metrics that go along with that where I'm like, what's the cumulative sum of something compared to the cumulative sum of a prior period of time? And then what's the difference between those two?
Right.
Now I'm really honing in on like a metric that is a little bit more advanced. But once you understand it, I think it's a lot more actionable because now we can say, okay, now we really understand how far away from plan or whatever we're expecting is now pushing me away from that data.
And I will happily introduce those and have someone tell me that's not either like important or that's inaccurate, and come up with something else rather than just display the data.
And I also like some of these ideas. Like sometimes as we are involved with a lot of reports and thinking about these ideas, I think we're to some degree, we're studying what is good behavior or good reporting to some degree. We have to assume that whenever we walk into a situation, not everyone has studied to the level that we have. And so sometimes you'll come up with an idea, you'll put it on the table and you just got to be like, I have an idea. You put it down, you show people, explain it. Here it is. And you just kind of need to leave it there. You just need, okay, I'm going to just leave this idea here. I'm going to let it go. I'm not going to hold on to it too hard. You walk away from the idea. And what happens is you plant, and this is probably one of these fallacies that we're talking about. You're like planting a seed in someone's mind of like, oh, that is an interesting concept. And what will happen is something in the future will occur to them and they'll be like, what about that idea that you had? And then you might resurrect that idea later on. You don't always need to implement it right away. Sometimes it's easier just to plant a couple seeds around some best practices. And if they don't agree with it, just, fine, move on, go to the next thing. But I find when you have a good idea, that idea will usually resurface and there'll be more communication about it later on. I want to move on to one other item here. We've been talking a little bit about reports and how we handle reports. I think this one is more about the administration of reporting. So this was the sunk cost fallacy. So
it's a good one to end on. Yep.
Okay. So I think the sunk cost fallacy is another interesting topic here because as not necessarily me building the report, but I think there's always this, we invest time, effort, money into building these things. And sometimes that level of effort or that amount of time invested into what that solution has been has influenced whether or not we will just abandon it and move on. We may be throwing good time at bad ideas. And I think as a management piece of this, I see this pretty often of where we have spent a lot of effort. There has been something that has been developed. It's not a good solution. And we're not really, we're just kind of keeping the wheels on this thing, right? I mean, one thing I can think of off the top of my head is, hey, we've got all these Excel files. It's very easy for people to add data to them. Oh, let's just absorb all these Excel files right into Power BI. Okay, like we can do that. It works, but we're constantly spending time fixing your Excel files and fixing the pipeline because it keeps breaking. I'm spending so much effort. So at some point, you guys be like, yeah, we've invested a lot of time in this. We just need to throw this thing out. We need to get rid of it. This is not a good solution. It is not working for us anymore. We've got to rethink and don't let that initial investment hinder you from coming up with a better longer term solution. So that's kind of where I was going with this one. This is more of like a program management standpoint as opposed to like pure report building.
Well, but at the same time, like you can paint yourself in a corner with a good enough model or report, and you're being faced with, kind of what we talked about in 185, which is a second system effect, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do when you hit that point where whatever you built is no longer sustainable or won't move forward?
Correct.
Do you start over? And in some cases, to your example, maybe you do, right? You change the process of how you collect data because it's inefficient and not going to support the needs that are now there.
Yeah.
Versus, are there opportunities to iterate and move to a new solution? But either way, to your point, you have to get over that sunk cost fallacy where like, oh, it's not worth it. We've invested so much.
We've already worked on this report for a year and a half. We can't get rid of it now.
which
maybe
I think
you
is
need
a challenge, right? The data volumes and technology and how fast it's changing.
Exactly.
I think presses on this one a lot because
Yeah.
just because we've spent a bunch of time over the last couple of years, if a new feature comes out that makes it obsolete, then we need to pivot.
Yeah.
And hopefully in that time of while you were developing, you learn things about the data, the modeling, and the exercise. So even if you did have to build the second version of something, hopefully there's enough that you could reuse or learn from and build it better, more flexible, or more, not to go overbuild it, but you've learned something that you can then do the next build quicker than you did previously.
Yeah. I think my final thoughts are like ultimately very, very worthwhile to watch this series. Not just for the things we talked about, but for some of the traps that you would find yourself in other areas. All these areas are great opportunity for using, I think, critical thinking or being slightly skeptical based on just like understanding psychologically how our brains are potentially fooling us. Because we're it's geared to digest and make sense of the world, but understanding like these key concepts certainly was eye-opening for me, not only in business but personal. And I think it would be fine, or some of these are going to be impacted to greater degrees because some of them already are being manipulated from the standpoint that our information sources are geared to feed these traps. And a lot of them are designed for just how we, cognitive bias being one of those, how you make sure that you're not, just getting stuck in this is the way it's done always, but being receptive to other ways and opportunities for us to enhance the reporting that we do, but also other areas of the life. So I thought it was a fantastic watch.
Good. Excellent. I thought so too. I think there's a lot of as I looked at the lens or watched the videos, I was taking this in and thinking about what I do on a daily basis for either work or consulting or Power BI, and I felt there was a lot of at least points just to be aware of, things that you can think about. Don't want to manipulate the situation, but on the other hand, there's people run the same way a lot of the time, so they think very similarly in many situations. So this is a good. I feel this is a good series of videos to watch just to kind of get my head around it. Excellent. Tommy, any final words? Any final thoughts?
I think we only touched like 6 of them out of the 21 too. Maybe
there's a lot of them.
7,
There's a lot more. Yeah. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for listening to the podcast. We appreciate your chatting in the comments area. That was awesome. We appreciate your feedback there as well. Thank you for helping me find the book or TV series that I was talking about, which was called The Foundation. So that's what it was. 45 minutes later, I remembered what it was. So thank you very much, chat, for helping me spur my mind from Isaac Asimov was the series. Anyways, the only request we have back to our audience is if you love what you hear here, or even if you just mediocre like it, you don't have to love it. Just kind of it was interesting. So if you even thought it was just decent in nature, we would love for a thumbs up. Let us know, let the YouTube algorithm know that you liked the content we're producing here. And as well, if you don't mind, share it with somebody else. We love it when people share the content because it really helps produce more audience and lets other people hear this great content as well. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Yeah, make other people get the recency bias on the podcast and anchor their brain to it. Start sharing it. Like everyone's gonna start saying, like, the podcast. I didn't see that before.
Yeah, then we'll get exponential growth, and and we'll get bias, envy from jealousy because people aren't listening to it. They do all these great things.
So
no more sunk cost fallacies with this podcast. This is a solid investment for a whole hour. You won't lose any time or get dumber from this at all.
Yeah, listen on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast. You can listen to the audio. If you want to do the video and join live, you can do so on YouTube, 7:30 in the morning, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Follow PowerBI.tips.
Yeah, this podcast is the halo effect. It won't get any better than this. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.